everybody. Welcome to Before College TV Live. This is another edition of 5 Big Questions. And today I have the privilege to hang out with Ted Fiske, also known as Edward Fiske. He is the world famous author of the Fiske Guide to Colleges. He is a former editor of the New York Times, and Ted has just he's seen so much. He's done so much writing. He also is an international traveler. He studied education in Southeast Asia, New Zealand, South Africa. He's published several other books with his teammate, partner, Helen F, who's a professor at Duke University. And Ted is just an extraordinary individual, someone who I love hanging out with. I've had the privilege of actually being able to break some bread to share some meals with Ted. Everybody, please welcome Ted Fiske. Great to see you. This is pretty dramatic.
Now, on that note, can we stop and go home? It's going to be downhill from now on.
Oh, I know. It might feel that way, but boy, we have a mountain to climb, and I am excited to be here with you because I have a ton of respect for you. I don't know if I've ever told you that. Have I ever said that?
No, that comes as real news. but fortunately, I'm sitting down.
We always have a nice time. Our publishers, we share the same publisher, Source Books, when it comes to the Fiske Guide. So Ted and I have had the chance to hang out and actually have dinners together and see each other at NACAC, and it's really been a joy. It's something
you are a valued professional colleague.
Well, look at that! Wow, I'll take that. Now we should go.
You put that on the back of your next book.
It's good to go downhill from here. Yeah. So, I sit across the table from you, and you share such wonderful stories, and you really have lived and continue to live so many stories and lives. And I'm curious to go back all the way to when you first started dreaming. When you were a kid, a young boy on this walking the streets of, where were you a young boy walking the streets?
Philadelphia.
A young boy wandering the streets of Philadelphia, all full of dreams and maybe a little bit mischievous. Did you have a dream?
You make me sound like Benjamin Franklin.
Right.
It's a compliment, but
with your kite and the string and the storm.
Just don't touch the key. It's bad for you.
It's wisdom. That's good advice.
Yeah. Okay.
So did you have a dream starting off? Was there something that you really wanted to do? And I'm curious to know if you're doing it.
No, I just kind of take things as they come. And I really had sort of an unexceptional upbringing, but the one thing that I always did as a kid was journalism. I mean, I was the editor of every newspaper that I ever came in contact with, a high school magazine and college newspaper and so forth. So I always kind of gravitated toward journalism. I can remember as a kid when I was editor of the high school magazine, I just loved the experience of going to the print shop and watching the first copy of it come off the press. And it was just sort of the visceral, tactile sensation of you've written something and then, there it is coming out of this machine. And I used to love, when I was working at the New York Times, I started out covering religion and then I became the education editor. But I used to love the New York Times at that time was still published and printed in Times Square. So, I mean, you can imagine you're running a factory on West 43rd Street, 100 yards from Times Square, with this business where you're manufacturing this product and you have to have the product come out exactly on time or you lose that business forever. So you had trucks going into Times Square and getting filled up with the thump of big bundles of newspapers, and then they drive off. And I just loved whenever we would be whenever I'd be staying late and going to the theater or something, or having dinner in New York, I would love just to go by. And that was when the trucks came and you had this visceral sense. It was wonderful. I just loved it.
Yeah, it sounds magical.
Yeah.
And I love that part. I love that you've been a part of journalism through just, it's almost the Gutenberg press in terms of just the internet and how things have evolved. And I was trying to figure out where, I wanted to find your first article because I was doing a little digging, and I don't know if this is it. I tried so hard. This is January 19th of 1967. Okay. And then this is the story. Let me show you. There's another story here. This is the actual story. Poll gets views of churchgoers. Do you remember that story?
No, I don't. But I've been writing for the New York Times for 3 years at that point.
Oh my gosh, I did some horrible research.
Yeah, I started as a news clerk there. I was essentially a glorified copy boy, just carrying a copy around the newspaper,
Really?
around the newsroom, and then I became a reporter. And when I went into journalism, I thought if I'm going to be a journalist, I want to work for the New York Times, which was the best paper.
Right.
And so I took a copy boy job just so I could sort of get within the institution. And I figured either I would get promoted, or if they didn't find it in their they didn't think I ought to be promoted, maybe I should find another profession.
Right.
But it worked. I became a reporter within a year, which was actually quite fast at that point. And I have a degree in theology, so that was my other sort of background. And I'd worked at a church in Harlem for a while. And so they assigned me to the religion desk. And it was a great time to be a religion reporter because it was right after the Second Vatican Council. And you was all the turmoil and the priests and nuns leaving the church and getting married, and all these doctrinal disputes. And I used to have to go to Rome every summer or two because I figured out God goes to Rome in the summer, usually October, which is when the tourists have left, or at least a lot of them. But the weather is still spectacular. Yeah. And so there was that. And I was essentially watching a medieval institution take on the Enlightenment, modernism, the New Left, and the Protestant Reformation all at once. And so that was a great story. I was always writing leads like, for the first time since Martin Luther, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And then after that, everything, no pun intended, but sort of petered out. And it was the rise of all the cults and the sects. And the Children of God, and I went on a kidnapping where some parents rescued their kid from this.
You were there. You were part of the rescue.
Yeah, with a photographer. Yeah, with a photographer. Yeah.
Was it a van? I imagine a van.
A van? No,
they just sliding door, and they grabbed the.
No, it was just a family sedan, and they took him down to Middletown, Connecticut, and. But anyway, so that was a very different kind of journalism, because the first period where I was watching all these structural changes in the Roman Catholic Church, then this one, I was just what I knew about church history. I had a degree. It was very helpful, so I could put things in the perspective of 400 or 500 years. With covering all the sects, the job was essentially to try to communicate the sort of religious experience that people were having today to the reader. So it was a very different kind of writing, and it posed its own challenges, because if you have a bunch of people sitting around in a circle speaking in tongues, it's a little hard to be inconspicuous. And as a journalist, you're the observer. You don't want to participate. So but you develop techniques for doing that.
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun.
I mean, you were in the middle. You were in the middle of it all, and
then I got to be very good at dealing with people who held firmly to dogmatic beliefs. because that's religion. So they decided they needed an education editor. They thought, hey, he can probably handle education. So,
Did you want to do that? Was that something that excited you at the time, or
yeah,
was it
yeah.
like?
Yeah, I mean, journalistically, there were in the Newsweek parlance you call back of the book sections, but I had a subject I was talking. I became pretty knowledgeable about it, and so it was very very similar to covering religion, covering education. Not a lot of breaking stories for the next day's news. But but you also got to report, not just on events and conventions and resolutions, but on ideas and sort of theological trends or educational trends. So it was really very stimulating, and it was anyway. It was great fun.
Yeah, you started as the education editor. Was that in 1981, or was that 70s? 75.
Yeah.
Right. So you did that for quite some time, and I think I don't know if there were a lot of education editors at the time who were doing what you were doing. When you were in that role, there has to be a day, there has to be an event, there has to be something that was pretty jarring to you. Somebody getting really upset or uncomfortable, and you really having to dig in and defend your position or change your position. Is there a day, an event that you can remember that sticks out during your time at the time?
Well, there were a lot of really fascinating stories. I mean, one of the stories was when Pius VI, the Pope, flew to Istanbul, or AKA Constantinople,
Right.
and it was the first time in 1,000 years to visit the ecumenical patriarch, who was the head of all the Orthodox churches. So this was the first time in 1,000 years that the leaders of the Eastern and the Western churches had met. So that was kind of fun. I flew on the Pope's plane to go to that. So it was kind of like an ecclesiastical Air Force One.
Oh, it's interesting. Did you was there any like Pope souvenirs?
I do have a wine glass souvenir. He gave all the reporters got a wine glass with a papal coat of arms on it. I still have it.
Right.
I could go in the other room and get it and show it to you if you really wanted to see it.
Oh,
maybe you'll just take my word for it.
No. If you have a cup that you got while on,
all right, hold it.
This is great. I don't think we've ever seen Ted's Pope wine glass that he got as a reporter covering the Pope's visit to Istanbul, Constantinople. I'm going to sing, but look at this. This is fascinating. I love this. So that's the glass. You got this. Is it?
Can you see the papal coat of arms there?
It says God is good.
It's made in Rome, 19.
That's it. So that's so cool.
So it's not exactly the status of a relic. But I mean, that's not like a piece of the true cross or something. But hey,
cool.
You do what you can.
How many people have flown on a plane with the Pope?
A few hundred. Yeah,
a few hundred. You got a real number.
Well, journalists, and it was fun watching the Italian journalists because they of course, the ones who cover the Vatican, they of course almost worship the Pope. So to be sort of able to ask questions to the Pope is just a lot of fun for. So on the plane, I was watching the Pope, and it was almost more fun watching the journalists, the Italian journalists.
How many rows away from the Pope were you?
I don't know. I was in a seat. He came down the aisle.
Oh, he came down the aisle to go to the bathroom?
Well, I didn't ask him that.
No, but did he come down the aisle? I want to be, all being respectful, and I didn't know, because you're sitting in the seat. When I see someone come down the aisle when I'm in an airplane, I think, it's their time to take a break.
Well, he wasn't dressed like a flight attendant.
Was he dressed like the Pope?
Yeah, he was dressed like the Pope. White robe and all that.
Did he have the headpieces as well?
No, he just had a skull cap.
Okay, that's a whole. Well, that's not what we came to talk about, but boy, that sure is interesting. Right, I know. How does this relate? But this was the stuff before the college guide piece. Was there any college related stuff that really that was jarring or shook you, or a president or admin who said, "Listen, Ted, I got a big problem with you." I'm sure that's happened over the years, but when
Oh
you
yeah, well, I got banned from the White House.
interesting.
Uh,
Why?
well, Richard Nixon had a. I could show you something here. I've got a
Yeah,
letter.
show me. I want to see
Yeah, all
this.
right,
Oh,
hold it.
cool.
All right, so some background. Richard Nixon, when he was president, most there's a church right across. Actually, it's a church where Trump went and held the Bible in front,
Right.
upside down. But anyway, it's called the Church of the Presidents, and it's way back. I don't know, go back to George Washington. Presidents of the United States went and worshiped there. Richard Nixon had a different approach, so he thought rather he was going to God, he was going to have God come to him. And so he used to have church services in the White House, in the East Room. And so I did an article for the New York Times Sunday Magazine about a White House church service, which was it was fun. It was different. And so I went to one. And one of the points of having the White House church services was they weren't strictly religious. They were services, but they had there was some politics there. It was a chance to invite your followers and friends and potential donors and so forth to come and be in the White House. And so I mentioned this in the article that there were some religious motivations to this, to these church services. Political motivation. And anyway, apparently, and it was a good article, actually. I reread it a while ago, and I really liked it. But the White House didn't like it. And so there was a memo, and I found this in a book. It was mentioned in a book. I didn't know this at the time, but this is a.
Oops, I keep putting the wrong one. Hold on, I don't want to get you there. Okay.
Right. There's glare. So what is it? It says the White House, Washington, administratively confidential, with a note from H.R. Haldeman. Some people may remember he was chief of staff. August 10th, 1971. Memorandum for Alex Butterfield, who was an assistant in the White House at the time, from H.R. Haldeman. Here's the text of the memo. It is absolutely imperative that it clearly be understood by all concerned that Edward B. Fiske, the religion editor of the New York Times, is not to be invited to any White House church services again in the future under any circumstances whatsoever. So anyway,
that is.
So I made it on the Richard Nixon's enemies list, which it's a badge of honor.
Look at that! Wow, yeah. That's you never went again, right?
You never interviewed anybody else who was banned from the White House.
No, I'm getting a lot of bonuses here.
Yeah, you operate in higher circles, I guess.
Did that upset you, getting rejected by the president?
Well, I didn't know it at the time. It was only when this book came out about Alex Butterfield's papers. He was an aide who left fairly early before the big scandals. But there I was in this book, and he had discovered this. He talked a lot about Nixon's personality defects, and this was an example. And he printed the memo in the appendix to the book. So I didn't know about it. I knew there was one time when I wanted to go back to a White House church service because Billy Graham was preaching. Mm-hmm. And I had interviewed Billy Graham a few days before that, and they wouldn't let me in. They wouldn't give me a pass. Oh. And I even asked Billy Graham if he would put in a word for me, and he said he would, but it didn't help.
Because you were banned.
So I was banned, but it took about 30 years before I knew that I was banned.
Right. I wonder if it's better to have it, to have to wait 30 years. Then you have to deal with the hurt feelings, and he's gone anyway because he was banned. So you,
I'll have to give some thought to that, Harlan. I can't give you.
I was hoping to get an answer on that one. So, as the education editor, you're in the middle of schools providing just an enormous amount of information. Just the whole landscape of college and higher ed started to change, and you felt that the consumer needed better information.
Yeah, what happened was this was the early 80s. I mean, it's been going for close to 40 years now. The last of the baby boomers were finishing up with college because baby boomers were born from 46 to 64. So they were finishing up in the late 70s, early 80s. And so the number of high school graduates was declining, and colleges were worried. A lot of colleges were worried about filling up their classes. So they became very aggressive in their marketing. Now, as we look back on this, it all seems very kind of quaint. It was 4-color brochures and mailboxes and videos. Remember them? Videotapes. It's an old technology that you can't work these days. But anyway, so the colleges were doing a lot of aggressive marketing, and I had a lot of fun covering this. I wrote an article for Atlantic Monthly about it, then called Atlantic Monthly. And because the colleges were doing some wild stuff. One of my favorite stories is there was a school in Indiana, which is, flat, and there was a huge rainstorm, and an enormous puddle formed in the middle of the campus green. And so an alert person in the PR office went out and took a picture of this lake. It was half an inch thick, but it was a lake that had formed. And then you got some students to sit around the edge of it. And by and large, that picture appeared in a view book the next year. But unbeknownst to the editors of the yearbook, if you looked carefully at the couple of the students who were assembled to sit by the side of this non-lake, they were smoking a joint.
Oh, yeah.
And so I don't know, but it ran in the college view book.
Right.
So I don't know. My guess is it probably helped boost applications that year. I don't know. But anyway, they were doing all these sorts of things. So it was a lot of fun to write about it. And I did it several times. It was on the front page of the Times. I did it in the business section and so on. But then it occurred to me, and my publisher at the Times had a book publisher at the time, Times Books, logical. And we decided somebody needed to come in on the side of the consumer to cut through all this propaganda, one-sided propaganda, which was coming from the colleges. And so that's how the Fiske Guide was born. It started out as the New York Times Selective Guide to Colleges. But it became pretty controversial, which is another whole long story. But because I was saying things in the book that I couldn't say in the newspaper. You wouldn't say, some students say that the dormitories are palatial, others say they are like hellholes, or some people say the food is great, or some people don't. I mean, it just wasn't what you do in a college guide. The purpose of the Fiske Guide is to talk about the culture, the institutional personality of the schools, and to convey that.
Right.
And it's not something you would put in a newspaper. And so anyway, Times took its name out, and I got a lot of publicity and the book. And so the rest is history. And then eventually people just kept referring to it as the Fiske Guide. So it became eponymous. And
right.
Yeah.
What part of writing the guide? Let's go back to when you started writing it, because I want to ask you this as a two-part question. When you started writing the Fiske Guide, what part of it gave you the most joy when it was in its earliest stages, when you first started putting it out?
Well, I think this may sound a little strange, but I think the most interesting thing was to realize and to be able to write about the incredible diversity of American higher education. I mean, if you look at higher universities in Europe, first of all, they're mainly universities. You don't have a lot of small liberal arts colleges, but you tend to go to the university, to an urban university near you. I mean, that's sort of the pattern. Now it's getting a little more complicated, but in the United States, that's not the way universities were founded. They didn't grow up around big cities. As a matter of fact, the exact opposite, because a lot of the origins of American higher education, there was religious denominations, and what they wanted is to get students out in the boonies so they could teach them their own particular religious philosophy. So Cambridge, when Harvard was founded in 1836, Cambridge was a suburb. Well, it wasn't even a suburb. It was a separate city from Boston. Princeton's still out in the boonies. New Haven is, not near anything. Yeah. So it was. My wife just walked in. She wanted to see.
I love that. This is what we get. This is the beauty of being able to do this.
Yeah.
Because I've heard so many wonderful things. You were talking about how they would.
There's this incredible diversity of American education. So you've got everything from single-sex 2-year colleges in the boonies to world-class urban universities, some private, some public, research universities. You have evangelical schools, you have Jesuit schools, you have HBCUs. There's all these kinds of choices of different types, and the risk. There was editorial risk of, once you'd written about the 17th small liberal arts college in Ohio, where the faculty often invite the students to their homes for dinner, they would all sound alike. Kenyon, Denison, Ohio Wesley. How do you tell them apart? And that was a risk, because I didn't know what the answer to that was. But the fact is that even colleges that look alike on the surface, in terms of enrollment size and programs and so, are very different. They have their own culture. They have their own histories, especially. And no school can ever get away from its history. It's just part of its personality. And so that was fun, was to realize there was this incredible diversity. So there's lots of interesting stories to tell about American colleges and universities, and then to boil it down and to write an essay anywhere from 1,000 to 2,500 words, conveying that unique personality, that unique institutional culture of the schools, and the culture persists. I mean, even the men who go to Vassar, after Vassar was a women's college, right. Then it started accepting men. But the interests of the men who went to Vassar were not all that different from the interests of the women who were there before. I mean, it's designed for certain the kinds of people who gravitate there, and so that was fascinating to realize.
Yeah. And when you're researching these schools and trying to uncover the cultures and the stories and the histories, did you have to physically go to each of these schools, or would you use your surveys and reporting to capture that?
We got 325 schools, so there's no way I could.
Road trip.
And also, if I visit a school, I get a fairly distorted view of it,
Which, I mean, that's interesting, because
I meet a couple of future Rhodes Scholar students and see the honors program. So yeah, I have to watch that.
Ted, I wanted to interject, because for parents and students who are visiting schools, that question of, if you want to learn about a school, well, you have to visit the school. But now, because of COVID and what's happening right now, and also the cost of visiting schools, and also if you visit a school, you might get a skewed perception of the school. You clearly have been able to get a sense of.
Yeah, well, but a parent visiting a school is very different than the editor of a college guide visiting the school.
Yeah,
they're trying to impress the editor. They're not necessarily they're trying to impress students and their parents, but it's a very different thing. But I think visiting a school is really terrific.
Yeah.
And especially if you can spend an overnight at the school. I mean, within 24 hours, you can really nail the culture and the personality of a school.
Do you think someone should go to the classes? Should, like, during the 24 hours, what do you
going
suggest?
to a class, looking who's sitting with whom in the dining hall, just being there physically. It doesn't take very long. You get a sense of whether you belong. It can almost be sort of eerie sometimes. I mean, I say to parents, if you're driving on a tour and you go through the gates of the school and the kid turns and says, "I don't like it," you might as well just do a UE and go on, because I don't know. Don't ask me to explain why there's something subliminal about it.
Right.
But there is, the thing to do is to look for this personality, and it evolve. Personalities can evolve, but they don't change. And I guess the most dramatic example of this, bear with me a little bit, was University of Pennsylvania, which is an Ivy League school, one of the top schools in the country. And we get questionnaires from the administration, and then we get questionnaires from students. So that's the basic method, not just visiting, although I do visit some. But and so we were reading. This is for the first edition. Oops. We were reading the first edition, and I was reading the questionnaires from the students at Penn, and there was sort of an undercurrent of anti-intellectualism which ran through these questionnaires, which was sort of, I couldn't quite understand. So I put it aside for a while and did some interviewing. I talked to provost at Penn, who's a friend of mine, and what I discovered was that the Penn was founded by Benjamin Franklin, which I know, and even though I grew up in Philadelphia, I didn't realize that the liberal arts traditions at Penn were really pretty much post World War II. Over the first couple hundred years, Penn built its reputation as the first medical school, the Wharton School, business school, first psychological clinic, and so forth. And even to this day, it's a leader in service learning and service research. So Penn always had this tradition of pragmatic knowledge. It's not just technical, but what I realized was this went back to Benjamin Franklin, who was sort of the ultimate American pragmatist. And he valued, I mean, he was a scientist, he valued knowledge and all, but he always kind of thought of knowledge not as an end in itself in some vague way, but as having practical use. And so it makes sense that over this 200 years, Penn would follow in this sort of tradition, respect for the pragmatism of knowledge. But then the idea, and this is what I found so staggering, the idea that the values of some guy who died more than 2 centuries ago are showing up unsolicited in the responses on a questionnaire to kids in the early 80s was just staggering. But to me, it was the ultimate example of the consistency of a culture and a tradition.
Yeah.
That really makes American higher education so fascinating. So to answer your original question way back before I started pontificating, that's probably the most interesting thing is to assume that there's this incredible diversity and then have a chance to write about it.
Yeah, capturing the essence, the culture,
exactly,
the feeling of each institution, and the idea that each one has a distinct flavor and feel that can extend all the way back to the founders. That's something I've really thought about, and I think it's something that most people don't think about because the way college is designed right now is about scarcity. It's about scarcity and fear.
Yeah.
People are afraid they're not going to get in and that there aren't enough spots.
Yeah.
So the focus becomes, how can I work my hardest to get in so that I can get there, as opposed to how can I look at schools through a lens of what do I want and what aligns with me and my purpose.
Yeah, and the corollary of all this is that there are dozens of schools out there, literally dozens, that will be a really good fit for any particular student. So what I tell the students is, the chances of you being successful in your college search are huge. They're in, because the odds are in your favor, because there is this incredible diversity.
Right.
So you may not get into the schools you think you want to get into, but there are plenty of other goods out there. So I say, you will be successful even if you don't necessarily get into the school that you think you want.
I love that, and I have a similar approach of just, our students, they're the dream makers, they're the creators of their future, and it's not a school that's going to be the thing that's going to make them or break them.
Yeah.
So they need to approach this next phase of their life being really self-directed, which is really hard for an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old who's still, discovering their likes and dislikes. When it comes to a student going through this process, asking specific questions that can really speak to the essence of the school, or how a student's going to really be successful, or what they should look for, are there a couple questions or a few questions that you encourage students or parents to ask when going through this process that can really distill what they want down to the best parts?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure I can answer that in a big general way. I mean, one question I encourage people to ask is, who's going to teach me next year?
Yeah.
As a freshman or as a sophomore, because that'll give you, one of the important aspects of culture of a school is how do the students relate to the faculty members? There's plenty of good schools where you don't see a full professor until you declare a major.
How could that be a good school? I mean, I'm just kind of pushing back.
Well, let's say there's a well-regarded school. Let's put it that.
Right,
but one of the things when you ask that question of fit, not what's the best school, but what's the best school for me, which is another whole discussion. That one of the key aspects of that is, what's my relationship going to be to the faculty? So who's the other than what schools do with SAT averages, but the most corrupt statistic is faculty-student ratio. So don't ever pay any attention to what colleges say about a faculty-student ratio, because there's many different ways to calculate it. I mean, what are the chances that I'm going to be seeing a senior faculty member early on?
Right.
Because that says a lot about the culture of the school. One of the things we started doing a number of years ago was paying a lot of attention to freshman experience, special programs. And a lot of colleges have moved toward creating programs which, for at least one program, while students are still taking the general education, where they consciously expose them to high-level scholarly work for at least one of their freshman courses. And I think that those are really good ideas, and a lot of colleges do it. And it's something to ask for when you're looking at a college. Do you have this sort of thing?
Yeah, that was another question I was going to ask. When it comes to the trends, looking at the first guide that came out in 1982 versus the 2021 guide, when we would take those schools, if we take the schools and kind of compare one to another over the course of almost 40 years, are there certain trends, things that have jumped out most recently that you can highlight?
Yeah, there's been some evolution. I might just, as an aside, the fact that there is these cultures and institutional personalities persist is a reason that right now, as we prepare the next edition, we're talking about campus life and dormitories and stuff. And a lot of that's going to be outdated by the time the book comes out. So, but the fact is that the culture is going to persist.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm saying to readers, and I will in the introduction once it gets written, is that even though what we're saying here about some of the statistics and some of the living things about dorms and so forth are not accurate at the moment, that once we get through this, we hope within a year or two, things will go back to normal, and that institutional culture is going to reassert itself. So that's an active phase, but I think it's everything indicates that that's true. I think in terms of themes that have evolved, back in the 90s, there was a lot more concern about campus security.
Right.
So we started asking questions about that. More recently, there was a lot of concern about sexual assault. And so we started asking questions about what programs did the colleges have to combat that. There's also in the last few years been much more concern about the value of socioeconomic diversity, that if you're going to get a good education, you really have to do so within the context of a diverse group of fellow students. We started reporting the percent of Pell Grant students who are at a particular school. And then just in the last year or so, the whole issue of systemic racism and systemic inequality has become a huge issue. So I'm guessing that we're going to be seeing some evolution in what the colleges and what the students have to say about that as we move forward. So the basic themes are persistent, but these social and other issues assert themselves from time to time, and we try to be sensitive to them.
So do you, when you're looking at the next edition, do you do a survey of the college administrators and say what are some of the other issues that have come to the surface, or do you, as an editor, as just an independent editor, say, we got to include this?
No, I think we have a sense of the issues that are evolving. I mean, we're not talking about Gnostic issues of any sort.
Right. And you're still actively involved. Like, I've seen you at NACAC, and that's the National Association of College Admissions Counselors. And I see you there's this, so if people don't know, I mean, there are hundreds of schools. I mean, it is like, as far as the eye can see, there are little booths and tables, and you have some of the most influential admissions officers who are there, and you have people who maybe you didn't know or do know. And I mean, it's just a fascinating place. And then Ted is running around. You run. I've seen you running around to each different school to fill in the blank.
No, I hop. I don't run.
You hop and you put on your bunny ears and your tail,
yeah.
and you hop around the hall. But you really are. It's fun to watch you. Do you still have? Well, you've got a lot of passion for this. I mean, it's interesting to me to see that you seem to have a love for this. Is that just an illusion, or do you really still have a passion for this and do you still enjoy this?
For all the reasons I've said, higher education and colleges are really fascinating, and I'm a journalist. I like to write about it, but I also have a huge amount of respect for higher education, and so it's fun, but it's also important, and it's almost scary sometimes when a reader. I mean, I have a sense that I'm doing something useful, that I'm really basically trying to help people by informing them and talking about what really counts in a college and what doesn't. And it's almost scary when somebody will come up to me and say, I went to name a college because of what you said in the Fiske. And good. I'm not sure I want that responsibility, and I hope I wasn't the only reason that you went to a school. But on the other hand, I like the idea of being able to suggest, which happens a lot. People say, especially with women and singles and all women's colleges. And I have a huge respect for all women's colleges because most colleges are really pretty sexist, male chauvinistic places, and men tend to dominate airwaves, and women tend to do better in seminars and all. And there's a lot of sexism in the structure of higher education. I mean, just look at the male-female ratios on faculties, especially in the sciences. But the women's colleges don't have this. Women, schools like Wellesley and Smith and Holyoke and Bryn Mawr, Bryn Mawr, they really know how to empower women. And so I always say to women when I'm talking to people about colleges, don't dismiss the all women's college as an option, because you be in an environment for 4 years where they're not fish bowls, they're not test tubes anymore. There's plenty of social life. You're going to be spending 4 years where people expect you to perform, and they're real. And so every once in a while, somebody will say, I never thought. I know one woman, it never occurred to me, but she was swinging through Massachusetts, and it was in Northampton, and took a look at Smith and ended up there, and it was a terrific match. So I'm not sure how I got started on this, but
I think that I love stuff like that. I mean, I don't hear people say that, and also I think it's interesting that you have this very strong belief system that those schools are more equal, or at least empowering for women, and the sexism piece. And
if you look, even going back to the 19th century, the women's colleges have always been very strong in science. And back in the late 19th century, the original Seven Sisters, they were the only places where women could study science. And they basically turned out, and then my wife's an economist who went to Wellesley, and Wellesley her generation of female economists, almost all of them came from Wellesley, because they said, you can compete, you're just as good as anybody else. And and she helped, the head of the department helped nurture them, and wrote references and so forth. And so I liked, if somebody says, it never would have occurred to me to look at this kind of college before I read in the Fiske guide, then that I take as a compliment.
Yeah.
I just like the fact that for some people, I've just opened some doors. That's very satisfying.
Well, it's very unusual to have a guide that is so large to reflect the deeper culture and the meaning, and knowing the legacy, hearing that the founding principles and how this started is something that you can still see today, and knowing that when you read the guide, you're getting a really insightful look at not just the school today, but the culture that has carried over. And that's something that you don't usually find. So when students are looking for their places, I'm a big advocate of, you got to find your places, places where you sweat, play, pray, live, learn, lead, love, and work. So when you're going through the guide, thinking, where are my places, and aligning with those things that are important to you. I just have two questions, and you've been so generous with your time, and I'm so grateful for it. There are a lot of schools that aren't in the Fiske guide, and I know you've spoken about that before. If a school isn't in the guide, explain that that can still be a wonderful school. Because I think some people don't always see that or understand that.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, there are 2,300 four-year colleges, and back BA grading colleges, and we've only got room for about 325. So, we have our principles for selecting which ones, but the fact that a school is not in the guide doesn't say anything about the quality or the lack of quality. Yeah, and you might have, for example, a school in New England where there are lots of small liberal arts colleges might have a tough time getting into the guide, whereas a comparable school in Texas, where there are only about 4, would be in a much better position. So we try to have geographic diversity is one of the criteria that we use. So So it's arbitrary, and admittedly, but we try to have certain principles that we follow in picking. But often people will write to me and say, "How come this school that my daughter is interested in isn't in the guide?" And I write back and say, it's space constraints. My wife already thinks the book is too big and too heavy, and gives me a lot of grief over that.
That was one of my questions. I have a question. How many books, how many Fiske guides can you carry at once?
I've never tried. And, do you have a hand truck?
I was gonna say, I would say just carrying it. I know you've showed us a lot of things in your home. This might be a great thing. This could also be a good TikTok, seeing just how many you can carry.
Yeah, or how many Fiske guides does it take to screw in a light bulb?
This could be a good. Well, when I'm in the neighborhood, when this COVID thing lifts, I can come over. I know you've invited me for dinner many times, or did I invite myself?
I'm sorry, I didn't the last part.
I said either you invited me to dinner or I invited myself to your place.
Well, you're welcome anytime. Socially distanced, of course.
Very socially distanced, like from Chicago to North Carolina. I
get 600 miles.
That's a good social distance. Well, I'm just so thrilled to have you here, and the Fiske guide is such a wonderful contribution, and you're such a passionate professional who I know really cares. And I just want to thank you for your time. And
it's my pleasure. We share a wonderful publisher, and you're a good colleague, and I enjoyed it.
Well, Sourcebooks is wonderful, and I look forward to when this COVID thing. Hey, one other thing, this whole COVID thing. I know we didn't talk about COVID, but how do you think COVID will impact admissions, SATs, financial situations on campuses, and the whole college process? One last question.
That's another huge discussion. I mean, I might mention with the next edition that it'll come out next May and June. I'm not going to publish SAT ranges anymore.
That's big news.
For reasons the numbers are totally unreliable, and I don't put what I know to be unreliable information in the book, because you have a combination of the growing number of test optional schools. You have the fact that so many students don't have access to the test in the first place, so it gives them an unfair advantage to students who do, if the schools take this all seriously. And then there's just the debate over how unfair they are. The test, it used to be that the SAT scores was a way to sort of identify that diamond in the rough student, who might be in a not very good high school, But now with test prep, it doesn't mean any of that. It's made that it made colleges useless and the tests useless for that purpose. So at least for the next couple of years, we're just not going to publish the tests. The scores, the ranges are readily available. You can go onto a college website, but I just don't want to be in the business of publishing information that I know not to be reliable.
It's a good editorial standard. Yeah. I respect that. I know these parents and the students are all freaked out because now, they thought they had a better chance. And now because there's no test scores, I think the individual, the person who's really has their passions and who they are is going to be the thing that shines through and differentiates them. Would you agree with that?
And even before COVID, the colleges were moving toward less reliance on SAT scores, because they understand now that, especially with all the test prep and the test optional, that the rigor of your high school curriculum and your grades are so much more reliable measures of your academic ability, and so they're looking at those, and that's not going to change.
Right. What about that kid who started off? Oh, sorry.
Especially ways of confirming for colleges. Increasingly, they see the test scores as a way to confirm what the impression is from the test scores and the grade. I mean, from the grades and the rigor of the curriculum.
What about that kid who started off with like a 2.5, right? First semester, really struggled in high school. But now he's taking AP classes or she's taking AP classes and they're just kicking butt, but their GPA is like a 3.4 because they started off so terribly. Do you think that student should try to apply to those highly selective
Well,
schools? Roll the dice?
the one thing college admissions office is they look for an upward trajectory. So some colleges no longer even use freshman grades. And so if you're coming on strong they're going to look at where you end up, not necessarily. So the fact that you're doing much better later on is in your favor. But the schools with fairly sophisticated admissions offices are sensitive to this. Yeah, that's one of the things they look like. What's the trajectory? The opposite would be they don't want you can't goof off your senior year.
Right.
So a rapid decline at the end is going to work against you.
They don't want that.
Upward trajectory will help you.
Yeah, I like that idea. I think it gives hope to people who sometimes look at the statistics and the GPAs or the test scores and think I'm not good enough. But I think just trying is great. And I have many more questions, but I really want to just respect your time, and we can continue this. I was joking. The longest we go is 5 hours. I'm not going to go 5.
We passed that long ago.
Does it feel like that?
Yeah,
it does. Well,
I don't like listening to myself talk that long.
Oh, you are.
I never learn anything new when I talk.
You don't, huh? Well, I sure did, and I know everybody watching did. And I want to give you a big thanks. And for anybody who's interested in getting a copy, the Fiske Guide to Colleges is something that should be on everyone's shelf. Definitely check that out. This is Ted Fiske, a wonderful person, author, and journalist, and grateful to have you here. Thanks, everybody, for being here for 5 big questions. I think it was more like 50 big questions. Be well, and thanks so much, Ted. Really appreciate it. Have a great afternoon. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.